أنتم تستمعون إلى الديوانية.
نخي מאזינים לדיווניה.
אתם מקשיבים לדיווניה.
أنتم تستمعون إلى ديوانية.
From the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, you're listening to Diwaniyya. Welcome to Diwaniyya. I'm Ben Silsbee. This month, we're talking about Middle Eastern, or Mizrahi Jews. 3 Moshe Dayan Center researchers will share their childhood memories. Esther Webman grew up in Cairo. Ofra Bengio grew up in Aleppo in Syria. And Samir Ben Layashi grew up in the Jewish quarter in Meknes, Morocco.
I'm Esther Webman, and I'm from Cairo.
I'm Ofra Bengio, and I used to be Marcel Basul, and I'm from Aleppo.
My name is Samir Ben Layashi. I'm a Moroccan. I live here in Israel.
I was born in Cairo. My family was in Egypt only since the early 20th century. They immigrated. From my father's side, they immigrated from Iraq. And from my mother's side, they immigrated from Syria, from Damascus and Haleb. But my father was already, and mother, were already born in Egypt, one in Alexandria and one in Cairo. And I was born in Cairo. So that's the nice mixture of Jewish community in Egypt, which was very heterogeneous. And it was composed of Jews, of local Jews. Of course, we were born in Egypt and were years in Egypt. Newcomers from the Middle East and newcomers from Europe and even the Ukraine and Russia. My aunt is married to a Tartakovsky, who was a communist at the time and a Zionist. I think it was therefore a very cosmopolitan community and very heterogeneous. But everything is over now.
Our family was there from time immemorial, but the same mixture, we can talk about the Jews of Aleppo. Actually, many Jews from Europe, from Italy, Spain, came to Aleppo, and you can see it in the language, in the Arabic language, where you have a lot of words from the Spanish, for example, cabezal, which is a pillow. It comes from Spanish, etc. You can see it also in the kind of food they are having, and but usually you can say that the Jews of Aleppo are of 2 groups: those of the very famous merchants who are, went all over the world. My own uncle went to Argentina, and I don't know of him anymore. But on the other hand, you have the other part, which is more in the Talmudic Torah, etc. And this is the main community. Of course, now there is no one Jew has been left in Aleppo nor in Damascus.
My family just moved to a Jewish quarter in 1968. They bought a house from a Jewish family who sold their house and came to Israel. A nice house from a guy. His name was David Amar. The family live in Nahariya. They sold the house in 1968 after the 1967 war because they felt things will turn wrong for the Jews. So one of the few families who decide to leave, because not all of them leave Morocco in 1948 and afterwards in 1967. So they sold this house for $5,000. It's about 7 big rooms with a kind of patio. I asked my father why you moved, because my father is a Tijani from the Tijani order, it's a Sufi order. He doesn't have Jewish friend, and he's not a citizen of the world. He would feel comfortable to talk to a guy from the Tijani order than a Jewish guy with 3 pieces suit who speaks French.
My father was I would say merchant is not the right word, but he worked with his cousin who owned a textile business in Khan el-Khalili. And my father worked there, of course, every day, and he had his people there, and they knew him. When I came back in 1982, I think, And somehow I asked about the name, and one person identified. He said, the tall Baghdadi guy. They continued to call him Baghdadi. Well, they were part of the social fabric of the place, and they maintained quite good relationship. Although I can assume that some caution was there all the time, especially with the rise of course, of nationalism and the Arab-Israeli conflict.
My father was a teacher. Actually, he studied his language by writing, teaching mainly in villages around Aleppo. He taught, all kinds, Arabic, French, small children. But then when the war came and everything, so he was put on pension. He couldn't teach anymore. So he was kind of not being able to start anything. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we were pushed out, because we couldn't find a job, we couldn't work.
Our neighborhood was actually, it was majority was Muslim already in the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. It was, I think, I would say 60% Muslim already and 40% Jews. My neighbors from both sides were Jews.
There were Muslims and Jews and Christians in the same building and the same entrance. I mean, it's not... It was a very mixed street or neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They felt Egyptians. It's why I don't really like an Arab Jew. It wasn't that. Although, I mean, in terms of nationality, they were stateless. My parents.
In the quarter, outside school, so we were together. We play football together.
There was no problem.
Look, I mean, I remember one day my uncle told me, you are hanging out with Jews for too much. So I remember he was...
what happened to you?
Does he know you moved to Israel?
Now he knows. No, he was he was...
I met him, right?
You met the religious guy?
Yeah, the religious, okay. But he was willing to talk to me.
Of course he would talk to you. But I remember he was becoming, this guy, he studied in Spain. He studied Spanish literature in Spain. Now he's teaching Islamic literature.
Externally, you wouldn't know that they are Jews. They are dressed, European dress, etc. But otherwise, even my mother, when my father was teaching in a certain village, she was dressed like an Arab because in order for her not to be, abused, etc. So it depends on the places.
And Samir, in Meknes, did Jews dress differently? Was there a religious element at all?
There was a religious element, but, generally speaking, we mistook them for French people. They were dressed in a very modern way, and if he wouldn't tell you I'm Moroccan, you would think that he is or she is French. That's first of all, they speak to each other in French. And maybe at home they speak in Arabic, but in the public sphere they speak in French. They dress in French way, very modern comparing to Moroccan Muslims. And I would even go further and say that the Moroccan kids, I mean, when we were 14 and 13 and became we want to imitate, French people in their way of dressing. We were imitating actually our Jewish friends. Of course, on Friday, so you can see that they are dressed more elegantly and they go with their kippah. The older people go to the synagogue in the Mela and then they come back.
It was not as religious as we have here, the Haredim, the Shas, not at all.
It's a kind of traditional. It's most of the Jewish Oriental communities are traditional, but there were also secularists. I can remember my father with the talit going out of home. I mean, this I know, walking to the synagogue.
Really?
And but at the time, they still also see the Christian holidays. I mean, there are so many Copts in Egypt. Even remember a Coptic a friend in school.
We didn't celebrate in common anything.
No, in common, no, not. It wasn't really shared with them. But they respected them, the feeling then. Later on, things of course changed.
My father and my mother were very Zionist, in spite of the fact that they didn't know too much, but he used to tell us stories, certain stories about, that to raise our feeling of Zionism, etc. And we would be crying when he tells these stories. We were very much in this story, probably because my brother and sister were already in Israel and we wanted to join them, so this helped us as well.
I remember my cousin telling me this, that her father warned her not to get in touch with any Zionist.
Israel, I never heard the word Israel in the neighborhood. I remember one day I was in Jojo's place, and then he had his older brother, the oldest. He was studying in France, in Sorbonne. And he sent them one day some pictures from Paris with girls, and all kind, and from the university. And one of the pictures, it was from Jerusalem, with the Har HaBayit in the background of the picture. And Jojo told me, look, this is my brother I told you about. He is in Israel. But I told him, but look at the mosque, this is Palestine. I told me, I know, but there, Palestine and Israel, it's the same thing. And people speak Arabic and Hebrew. He was explaining to me, for me it was not clear in my head what is Israel, what is Palestine, but... for him, it was not an issue. He just told me it's more or less the same space, and you call it like this, I call it like that, and that's all.
I remember an episode that my father used to tell us that in the 48 war, when there was emergency, of course. The Muslim guy came and slipped at the door in order to protect us from any mob, It was something which my father used to tell me. And that's why perhaps I have a less threatened approach towards Muslims and Arabs in general.
War, or whatever you call it, we were trying to just leave the country as quickly as possible. We were disguised as Arabs and went on the train, but probably somebody found out that we were not real Arabs and they just pushed us out, and then started the whole, period of a lot of unpleasant things, where the school was burned and the synagogue, one of the nicest synagogues in the world, I think, and where you have the Keter Aram Tzova, which is also the oldest, one of the oldest Torah.
The Aleppo Codex.
Yeah, the Aleppo Codex. Somebody managed to take it out, but the whole synagogue was burned down. I mean, it's there, but everything was burned once I went to visit it. There was also maybe a nicer experience when, the mob started to do something. So one of the families, Muslim families, took us in, and we were, many Jews people came there, and we were staying, and until, things started to calm down.
We left Egypt in 1954, as a matter of fact. It was just before the deportation of 1956 and 2 years after the Free Officers' Revolution. That was kind of trigger. Jews continued to live there. despite this, and only after in the wake of the Sinai 56 war, they were, in fact, some of them incarcerated and deported. In 3 days, they got a note, you should leave. And that's what happened to many of my family who remained there. But in 54, my father felt kind of that the ground is going to start shaking, and he decided to leave.
Contrary to what happened to Esti, we were not allowed to leave the country. Jews were not allowed to leave the country. My brother and sister had to leave when they were, two of them were 10 and 13 or something like this, very small children. And we wanted to move to Israel, but they would not allow us. We were actually one of the very few families I know of who went out with a passport. This was really very, very unusual for the Syrian Jews to do this. I don't know why it happened, why they let us go with a passport. Of course, we didn't say we are going to Israel. We went to Turkey. But probably because my father was a teacher and he gave up his pension and we gave up the house and everything we'd had. We just went out with, a little dress and things like this.
We had to travel by a ship, which had it was a very long journey. The first stop was Greece, and then Napoli, and then Marseille. And in Marseille, we were in the Camp d'Arenas for a month.
Oh.
And then we took a ship to Haifa. So it was a very long trip and not very pleasant. This was less pleasant than earlier experiences. And we were, we felt it as any other immigrant.
We went to Turkey, like you. We stayed 1 month in order probably to prepare the passports or whatever. And it took, for us, it was too long. And like you also, the trip in the sea was terrible. I remember it was a very bad experience. The sea was very, stormy. Yeah. And it was really quite a bad experience. But otherwise, we were expecting to see my sister and my brother. And this made us very happy. And unlike you, we were sent to a ma'abara, where we stayed for 1 year, which was quite traumatic. In a ma'abara where you don't have, you have one family in one room and you don't have all the no facilities at all. Yeah.
No, for us as well, it was a very great, a big shock to leave what we left behind and be in a place that has no electricity, no toilets indoors, mud. To see my father from his nice suits to the khaki kind of outfit was a shock for them and for us as well.
Thank you for listening to Diwaniyya, conversations on Middle East culture, history, and politics. Diwaniyya is produced by Alona Ferber, Shoshi Shmuluvitz, and Ben Silsbee. For more information on the topic of today's show and our guests, please visit the Diwaniyya blog at www.diwaniyya.blogspot.com. Diwaniyya is made possible through the support of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University.
This episode was recorded on April 2nd, 2012 at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University.